You have to understand that in order to understand whether or not this is even worth pursuing for you. Then you go and you start to ask questions around, well, what is the solution to those problems that you believe you have? Then you continuously iterate with your customer set to see if this solution is actually going to solve that problem. And as you're doing that, you're starting to understand, well, how do you access these customers in a scalable way? So the first few, you can call them up, right? Convince them to buy from you. But what's a longer term strategy here? What's your channel and sales strategy? All of these things we ask you to build out. And this is sort of a 10-week course, and by the end, you have hypotheses and what experiments you ran, and then what were the things that you discovered? How did that change the business model? Because if you realize that you can't access a particular customer, now you have to revamp who your customers are, right? So every week what we would do is we would have up on the board a PowerPoint presentation that sort of basically outlined customer, users, demand creation, channel, sales, product. Everyone would list hypotheses, experiment, results, what changed, right? For each of those different sectors. And then you would have the next week's, these are all the hypotheses that we have, and these are the experiments we're going to run. And you would run that for presumably way longer than 10 weeks. And ultimately, you're getting closer and closer to the right answer. And I mean, we saw this for companies that were doing sort of Groupon-esque businesses to a not a lawnmower, it was a weed killer, robotic weed killer company that was selling to farmers. And they were driving, I think they drove a total logged 3,000 miles, going from Central California back to Stanford every single week, just to do this customer development.
And just a little follow-up, how do you know when you've hit that, like you've hit the right answer, as you said?
There's no such thing as right answer.
All right, so at what point do you start?
You should never actually believe that you have the right answer, right? Look at the best companies are the ones that never believe they have actually the right answer. So you look at Amazon, they're constantly changing their business model, right? I mean, it's constantly expanding, it's all sorts of other stuff, right? And so, and it becomes increasingly complicated. The minute you think you have the answer, the world changes. And so I guarantee you the customer mindset changes, the users change, how you do demand creation has changed. If you aren't doing this on an iterative basis all the time, you failed. Yeah.
Can you go back to the process that you would go through to select an actual?
Yeah. So this is sort of important to understand as well. So if you go and look at my calendar, and you ask for an appointment at this point, my assistant Judy would probably get back to you and tell you that I'm booked up until August. Right? And so really important thing to understand from a VC's perspective is that our schedules are completely booked from 8:30 in the morning to 6:30 at night.
Are you saying August this year or August next year?
August this year. Right? But like I actually have like no free time, right? And I do sort of two to three events in the evenings every week, and I have 2 kids already, and the third one on the way, right? So it's no rest for the weary. So it's a very intense schedule that most VCs have, meeting upon meeting upon meeting, right? So when they come in to meet you, it's sort of from that perspective. What's interesting is between Mike and I, we probably receive somewhere between 100 to 150 business plans a week. We meet with somewhere between 5 and 10.
Can you go through the process of how you select that?
So I will. And then we end up funding somewhere between 2 and 4 a quarter. That's on the high end, right? So far this year, in 2011, we funded 4 companies. Yeah.
What was your goal for the first 5 years of the
So we only have one goal, and that is every year there are 15 companies that exit at greater than $500 million valuation. There are 8 companies that exit at $750 million or greater, and then 3 or 4 that get to greater than $1 billion. That's been sort of the trend through 2010. This year might be a little bit different, but we want to find the top 10 companies in any given year. Right, so that's my aspiration. We call them, in our firm, we call them thunder lizard businesses. We believe that there are fundamental companies that are just hatched from radioactive atomic eggs. They go out with a crazy ambition to change the world, and they're successful in it, right? They're like Godzilla. They emerge in Tokyo Harbor with an attitude, and they proceed to wreak havoc in that industry. Those are the companies that we want to fund.
What are, say, the 3 biggest signs when you're looking at a company that tell you that this is an atomic lizard? Is that what
I think it's product market fit, right? So a lot of people describe product market fit as product fitting some sort of customer desire. That's not product market fit to me. Product market fit is where you have uncontrolled pull from the market for your product. And I've seen that only a few times, right? Chegg is a great example of that. Walk into a board meeting, and the first question I ask, whoa, what are we doing about demand creation? Not the issue. We're turning away 85% of all the orders that come in because we can't possibly fill those orders. That's product market fit, right? When you see it, you know it because it's impossible to keep up with it. It's the same thing with ModCloth. Like, I talk to ModCloth about, I sit on the board of ModCloth, and one of the questions I've always asked is, what do you think it'll take for us to get to the next stage? Let's say $250 million in revenues. And everyone said, if we didn't change anything, you could probably still get there. Because the demand for the product is so strong. The only question is whether or not the back end systems will break before we get there. So we're in a race to fix that, right? But it's just sort of, when you look at companies that have that kind of demand, it is unmistakable. And the hardest companies are the ones where you feel like it's a good idea and you're just trying to find the customers who will believe in you. But the easiest companies are oftentimes the ones that turn into the biggest hits.
So what about, like, say, Twitter screamed that there's this market pulling, for it hardcore when they came out to make it turn into what it has today. Because there were Facebook statuses at the time, and when Twitter first came out, that was like my perspective. Like, I didn't go on it for a while. Like, my friends and I had a running joke, like, we're not going to use Twitter. We're not going to give in. This is like a purely nothing more than a fad.
It was interesting though. There was definitely pull right after South by Southwest. There was an amazing pull for that product. So I think, in pockets people were not believing, but it was always sort of a steady growth, right? And I think from where we sat, we could see that kind of exponential growth occurring even within that small community.
When there was originally that pull after South by Southwest, did they know, like, what the reason for it was? Like, what was the problem people were trying to solve? So many people use Twitter in different ways right now.
What's that? Yeah, it was just sort of like people were using it in a lot of different ways, but it was sort of starting to replace their RSS feeds, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
How active a board member are you? And what relationship, how close is that relationship, and what do you expect from the entrepreneur?
Yeah, and so I would have to say so I think every VC has their own sort of dynamic, right? So Mike has a very different dynamic with his companies than I do. We've both found actually it goes in cycles. And so the places where we get pretty involved, I found that VC financing, so follow-on financing, we have to get involved because we have pretty good relationships with the follow-on VCs. But before that, for me, I spend a lot of time on this, right? So I'm trying to understand all the time, who is the customer, where are the archetypes that you've created, and what does that mean for everyone? So what does that mean in terms of Is this a new market that we're going into, or is it an existing market? Are there ways of attacking the market that are pretty obvious, or do we have to come up with something totally new and creative? And so a lot of times I'm spending on product, or I'm spending on some element of demand creation. And then some of it is like they already know. So like ModCloth, a lot of it is sort of super taker cruise control, but there's certain elements of it that become really important. So hiring, as an example, is really important. And so at a ModCloth level, usually that's sort of a senior executive hire, CMO, COO, VP of supply chain, those types of people we're interviewing. At a smaller startup like TaskRabbit, I'm calling engineers and designers that they're trying to hire, and I'm giving them the hard sell on why they need to join TaskRabbit, right? And so it comes in at all different levels. It depends on what stage you're at. The reason why I'm involved in Floodgate versus any other firm, and I think it's sort of where I want to stay forever, is I love that early stage where the entrepreneur is neither jaded nor tired, and it's sort of, we're all in it together, and it's just full of optimism. So I love spending my time with my portfolio companies. I spend about 50% of my day working on portfolio company issues, about 25% on new deals, and 25% what I call just sort of general awesome people. Going back to your question and sort of how I think about the choice. So it all comes back down to that funnel and also sort of the thunder lizard concept, right? So number one, I'm looking for an authentic entrepreneur who has a reason for doing this business more than it feels like it's going to make a lot of money, right? So that's the reason why I'm not really excited about businesses that can be described as blank for blank. So Groupon for pregnant Asian women, right? I'm not that excited by that, because I don't really know, like most of the people who are building those businesses are excited by the fact that Groupon has made a lot of money. And I'm looking for people who want to innovate and want to create that next big thing. I've been asked if that means you have to be a first mover. That's not the case, right? I'm looking for unique market or technical insight that you have that I don't think anyone else has. And I'm looking for a large surface area of attack. So that's really the market size. Is this a huge market that we can attack and have a chance of grasping at a large chunk of that? Ultimately, we really want to have those top 15 companies in our portfolio, and so my aspiration isn't the quick flip for $30, $40 million. Those are decent outcomes, but they're not going to really make a dent in the portfolio mindset of a VC, right? So I actually don't think of it as a portfolio. If 1 in 10 really becomes a success, is that the way to think about it? No, right? Every single bet that we make has to have a shot at that. And so we're attracted to entrepreneurs that have amazing narratives around their startup. So the narrative is important because it's going to impact your ability to hire, and it's going to impact your ability to raise funds, and it's going to impact your customer in wanting to become that absolute fan of your product. And so we're looking for all of these things within a huge potential market. Oftentimes we'll categorize that as a non-consensus but right market or technical insight.